Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show, broadcasting on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful, fruited plain of Indiana. God bless Rush Limbaugh. Folks, in news this week, there is the property tax revolt. If you all know, I had Axe the gasoline tax billboards up across the state, and miraculously, Governor Braun axed the gas taxes just weeks after those billboards went up, so we're having an effect there. 2 weeks ago, I changed those out to property tax is theft. Guess what? Governor Braun has come out in support of eliminating property tax for seniors. And while I think that's great, it has to be for everyone. Again, the government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, and we can't throw the tax burden on just young people. The answer to this is to eliminate property tax for everyone. It can be done. Folks, Indiana has it, believe it or not, a $5 billion, with a B, billion dollar projected budget surplus this year. The property tax could easily be eliminated this year if our career politicians would just get their blood-sucking teeth out of the Hoosier taxpayer. You know, they are literally sucking the blood from Indiana, and it's repulsive on how much Indiana is taxed. You know, we have the second highest sales tax. We have ridiculous property taxes with assessments going through the roof astronomically for everyone. We all know that. And your local county tax assessors are playing along. Well, we have no choice in the matter. We are just doing what we're told. Meanwhile, your assessment is going up through the roof. That is not fair. You know what that is, folks? That is a tax on unrealized gains. It's no different than where the Republicans criticize California for wanting to tax the wealth of the billionaires and trillionaires out there. Well, the Hoosier Republicans are doing the same thing here in Indiana to people that just, want to have their house with the American flag flying out front, with the white picket fence, with their kids going to school, learning the Pledge of Allegiance. Instead, our Republican GOP establishment, not the grassroots, the establishment just views your home, your dream, as something they can tax to make you pay rent for something you paid for. There are obvious answers on this. Number one, assessments should not be based on what your neighbor's property is. It should be based on what you paid for it yourself. That is the biggest mistake we have allowed ourselves in Indiana to fall for, was the tax on unrealized gains. That has to stop cold turkey. It is absolutely wrong. Number two, we have to do it in a way that is fair for everyone. We can't be picking winners and losers. There should be no one having to pay rent to the government for the home they own. Folks, there is a solution to this, and Governor Ron DeSantis talks about this, and he says this, and he had this to say. Today in Tampa, I outlined the Save Our Homes from Excessive Property Taxes plan that will eliminate taxes on all homesteads. Property tax revenue collected by local governments has nearly doubled in the past 7 years. Florida homeowners need relief. Now is the time to stand up for taxpayers, enact historic reform, and save the home of every Floridian. Folks, guess what? Did you know that Indiana ranks number one in home foreclosures in the United States? Number one. Isn't that repulsive?
I've noticed Indiana seems to rank number one in a lot of categories that are not good.
Well, we're number two in sales tax. We're number 5 in gasoline tax, which is currently suspended, thank goodness. Hopefully, it will soon be eliminated entirely forever, because it is wrong. Again, Indiana state folks, the dirty secret the politicians don't want you to hear about is we are swimming in tax revenue. Indiana is flush with cash because you're paying for it.
And going back to this thing with Governor Braun, the thing that gets me with that is, that's great that it's, seniors won't have to pay the property taxes, but what, is all that burden going to get pushed on us young people?
Well, Nancy Mace had this to say, our seniors should not pay property taxes. Daniel Horowitz countered by saying property tax relief should be universal, not targeted. All homeowners should not have to pay government rent for property they own. for the American dream. That's what really annoys me the most on all this, folks. I'm using the word annoy. It's actually a much stronger word, but I'll stay with that because this is going out on the radio. You know, we have the American dream in the United States of home ownership, where any young person, young couple should absolutely be able to afford and buy a home and live in it, raise a family, have the white picket fence, the American flag flying out front proudly. And instead, the government just looks at that as property to pay rent on. And that's absolutely positively wrong.
It's definitely wrong, too, when you think about it. If you buy a television or you buy an appliance, once you buy it, you're not paying taxes on it every year. So why is it the same thing for your house? And that's absolutely
And that's
wrong.
one idea I think we need to consider, is because when that is figured in at the outset, when you purchase a home, you will know what the tax is going to be. Unfortunately, now you have no clue. So there's a lot of people, folks, in the state of Indiana who are listening probably right now and saying, my gosh, the property tax assessment on my home went up $50,000 last year by no fault of my own. I wonder what it will do next year. And folks, it's going up because of the inflation. You know, inflation is wiping all of us out. Look at what's happening to our national debt. Did you know that Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron Hounchin, Jefferson Shreve, they all voted for $30,000 of new debt thrown onto your shoulders as an individual taxpayer just last year? $30,000. Folks, you don't have to pay that today, but you're paying for it tomorrow based on what your assessment is on your property, because that is leading to inflation, and that is why house prices are skyrocketing, is because of inflation, because the American dollar is becoming monopoly money, unfortunately, due to these career politician leeches in Washington, D.C., who continue to vote for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt. And folks, in Indiana news, Andrew Ireland, a politician, a state legislature from Indianapolis, is that right?
Something like that, yes.
I believe so.
Okay. He came out and he says, I don't know, this was a tweet of his, I don't know who needs to hear this, but taxpayer-funded jobs should never go to foreign workers. American jobs are for Americans. Folks, listen to what Rob Kendall had to say about that. He says this person voted for a budget where government gives out millions of dollars to mega corporations to bring in foreign workers, then comes in here and complains about the things he voted to do. And for some reason, he gets away with it. Folks, I am going to speak the truth and shame the devil. I'm going to call out all politicians for their hypocrisy when they come out and say they are against taxpayer funds going to foreign workers when they actually voted for it themselves.
But see, that's what gets me with these establishment career politicians is they sound great on social media. You look at them on social media, they're like, man, this is the best guy since sliced bread. But then you look at their actual voting record, and it's absolutely pitiful.
Well, you know, this guy, he is apparently the campaign manager for Maximilian Engling.
Establishment Engling.
And folks, if that guy gets in, it's just going to be more tweets about how XYZ is bad, rah, rah, rah. But there will never be action on it. That's what happens in the establishment GOP. You get people like Jim Banks, who pretends to be against crime, but votes for the First Step Act, which releases criminals from prison early. He pretends to be an economic conservative, yet he repeatedly voted for trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt. Well, crime should never pay. Unfortunately, these career politician leeches like Banks believe that crime should pay. They don't believe you should do the time if you do the crime. I think it's pretty simple. You know, if you're a criminal, you have to pay the price to society for your actions. The liberals like Jim Banks, who often partners with Elizabeth Warren on letters, strongly worded letters, you know, these people, they're liberals, and Jim Banks, you know, he pretends to be a conservative fighter.
But the thing, when you look at them, they just want to be activists. They don't want to be legislators. Yeah, they do all the rah-rah speeches, and they do all this great stuff. But then when it push comes to shove, and they actually have to legislate good conservative values, they fail.
And not only that, Jim Banks talked a big game about all the illegals in the trucks, which obviously we need to stop that. But I think that's pretty hypocritical when he literally said in an interview something in particular to the Atlantic magazine in 2017. I believe it was about an influx of immigration.
Yes, Jim Banks called for an influx of immigrants to the United States. Folks, no. We are so sick of these career politicians who keep flip-flopping, saying one thing to a liberal audience like he did in the Atlantic magazine, but then when he tweets about it in Indiana on his Twitter account, even though he lives in Virginia,
Virginia's third U.S. Senator.
when he tweets about it here, you would think, oh my gosh, I agree with him. He sounds just right on it. But look at how he actually votes in D.C. and how he actually talks when he's talking to the liberal media. It's always totally different.
What's that quote about John Kerry, whichever way the wind blows?
Yes.
That's all career politicians, and that's why I think you have to have term limits. Again, I say this a lot. Jim Banks, I think he meant well when he went in, but he's just owned and paid for now by his donors. And so who knows what he will vote on anything, because it's always going to be for the dollars. He's an economic prostitute to his donors, pure and simple. That's what scares me about Maximilian Engelking, or Engling, Establishment Engling,
Yep.
whatever his name.
English.
Something like that.
Yeah.
This Maximilian character, this male model who worked in Banks's office.
And Kevin McCarthy's office, by the
And
way.
they're in it for a career, not about actually doing anything. And you get a whiff of that when you see when Engling is out talking about all these conservative things that he has no power over in the state of Indiana. And so he just wants the Secretary of State's office as a stepping stone rather than doing the nitty-gritty work of the Secretary of State office itself. That's the problem. That's why David Shelton is the optimum candidate for that office. Folks, we're out of time on this segment, but when we come back, we're going to get into data centers, and I also want to highlight something about the Indiana establishment GOP forcing Indianapolis to raise taxes on cars. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of Indiana on the John Rust Show on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So, folks, before the break, we're talking about the Indiana GOP establishment, and Rob Kendall brought this out. There's a big controversy going on right now in Indianapolis about the Indiana GOP Assembly offering millions of dollars to Indianapolis to repair their roads, conditional on Indianapolis raising taxes on their automobiles. So this is from Rob Kendall. So let me get this straight. The Indiana GOP General Assembly, who are supposed to be the party of low taxes, will only give road money to Indianapolis if they enact a massive tax increase. Stop voting for these frauds. Folks, this is from WRTV News. And it's a story about what's going on in Indianapolis and how it ties to the Indiana GOP Assembly forcing local municipalities to raise taxes. This is from the article. The 2027 match must be entirely new revenue, according to state law. If the city cannot provide the required match, it loses the state funding forever. Folks, this is how this state match works. The state law passed in 2025 and 26 offered Indianapolis extra road money, but the city must match it with local tax money. It has to be new tax revenue. Indianapolis must contribute $50 million in 2027, all the way up to $100 million starting in 2031. These are tiered tax increases on Hoosiers. Indianapolis car owners could pay a much higher vehicle registration fee under the new city council proposal to fix roads. You know, folks, guess what? We are swimming in gasoline tax revenue, at least until it was recently temporarily suspended. But we have to get that permanently suspended. Again, folks, I'm going to keep saying the quiet part out loud and what you're not hearing from all these politicians. We have a $5 billion, with a B, billion-dollar budget surplus projected for the state of Indiana this year. But what is the Indiana GOP establishment pushing? They are pushing up to $100 per year increase to register your vehicle. $100 more. All it is tax and spend, tax and spend. The Republican Party should always be anti-data centers. And by that, I mean we shouldn't be funding them. That's the problem I have with data centers, is why are we funding these billionaires and trillionaires to put in these data centers, which are literal cancers on our state? Literally. They are taking all of our water. They are taking all of our electricity, forcing much higher electricity rates. Folks, we all see what our electricity rates are doing here in Indiana. Hoosiers, on average, pay 17 cents per kilowatt for electricity. Folks, in Kentucky, right across the Ohio River, they're only paying 11 cents per kilowatt. We are a much higher cost for energy because, number one, we don't burn as much coal as Kentucky does. And number two, because we have all these data centers using all of our electricity.
Yeah, that goes back to the Indiana GOP establishment falling hook, line, and sinker for the Green New scam. I mean, they want to do all this, wind and solar, which, okay, I mean, they're not horrible, but, I mean, coal is one of the cleanest and most productive energy sources you can have.
Well, and folks, again, guess what? This is from the Indy Reporter, and you can find the Indy Reporter on Twitter at Indy_reporter_. It's a must-follow account on Twitter. It says, listen to this. The state has given data centers more than $655 million in sales tax breaks. And Amazon alone reportedly got over $560 million of that. The report also says these numbers weren't being really shown publicly until watchdog groups started digging into it. Folks, this is why we owe the Indy Reporter a huge debt of gratitude for finding out how much taxpayer dollars are being used to subsidize these billionaires. Why on earth is Indiana giving $650 million to Meta and Amazon and Google, these giant, sometimes trillion-dollar corporations? Well, listen to this. Amazon is building an $11 billion, with a B, billion-dollar data center campus in Indiana. It'll use as much electricity as roughly 1 million homes and about 300 million gallons of water every year. That's just one facility, folks. What on earth are we doing? Why are we subsidizing that? I am not anti-technology, but the technology has to pay their own way. Why should Hoosier taxpayers have to subsidize their own demise by these data centers coming in, which are really just wolves in sheep's clothing, to use artificial intelligence to do away with many of our Hoosier jobs? That's the part I do not like on this, is why on earth we are being forced to subsidize that. Why are you being forced to subsidize your own demise? So, folks, this is from Twitter. I saw this the other day, and I'm like, this is spot on. And this is from OMG Sidewalks on Twitter. It says, we are now in a weird era where a guy gets publicly shamed for running his sprinklers on a Tuesday while a data center the size of Costco quietly drains a reservoir so AI can generate a picture of your cat as a medieval knight, and the data center gets a tax incentive for it. Folks, that in a nutshell sums up what we're facing in Indiana, where as consumers, we're told to restrict our water use at times, especially during droughts. We're told to restrict our electricity use, especially during heat waves and cold waves. Look at what happened last winter. We all remember where all the power companies throughout the state of Indiana were warning Hoosiers to cut back on their electricity use and to turn their temperature down in their house because there wasn't enough electricity for the homes because, and they didn't say this, but this is the real reason, they needed that electricity for the data centers. James Fishback, a governor candidate in Florida, says he will ban them outright. They have to pay their own way, and they have to pay in a way that makes Hoosiers want them. And we have to figure out a way, until Hoosiers want them, We need a moratorium on data centers to figure out how to implement them in a way that's economically advantageous to Hoosier taxpayers. Right now, it's the reverse. These trillion-dollar corporations should be subsidizing Hoosiers to put these data centers in the state, not the other way around. It is ridiculous. You know, what I don't like about the Indiana GOP is they are forcing these data centers on us and giving them these, 50-year tax abatements. But then they're dreaming up, while the billionaires get away with not having to pay tax for 50 years, they're dreaming up ways to add $100 per car wheel tax or a $250 per truck wheel tax in Indiana to fix our roads. Why not use the data centers to pay for that instead?
They got there's plenty of cash from the data centers to get them to pay up for the roads.
But they're the ones giving the donations to these GOP establishment figures. When Mark Zuckerberg was clinking a champagne glass with Jim Banks somewhere, you just wonder who was getting what for what back then.
Always follow the money.
Follow the money.
Well, maybe it was just really good champagne. I don't know. Meta is building these massive data centers, and they are continually cutting their workforce. And they talk about, we're going to have jobs. And Governor Braun said this a few weeks ago, and it got my attention, and I did not like how he put it. He says that data centers are a godsend to rural areas. No, they aren't. No.
They're not.
No, they're just not. That's the absolute wrong term for it.
And that's pretty funny for someone like him. He lives in a rural area, and he's only saying that now because
I'm sure he would love a lot of data centers in Du Bois County.
As long as they're not next to his house. But an Indianapolis resident, and Justin, you may remember this. We saw the photo of it. They had a sign about a data center saying, "Let's build it next to Braun's house to see how he likes it." Maybe we should.
So, folks, listen to this. Meta is cutting 8,000 jobs. Meta is the corporate shell for Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. They are cutting 8,000 jobs, 10% of their workforce next month. That was just announced by the New York Post. These trillion-dollar corporations that are putting in these data centers, they're not going to share the wealth with you just for letting them replace you with robots. And that's the reality we're going to be facing. And folks, this is a terrible headline. I hated this. Amazon workers in Oregon allege the company told them to continue to work while an employee lay dead in the facility.
And that sounds like something that would come out of a third world country.
Egregious and evil.
Well, folks, this is just in. Data centers now account for 7% of the total U.S. power demand. 7%. And that is increasing rapidly. Folks, did you know that Indiana ranks number 12 in the nation for the number of new data centers today? Isn't that crazy?
I'm surprised it's not higher with the amount of data centers that are popping up.
Well, I think the Indiana politicians are trying to push it higher. But fortunately for them, Hoosier taxpayers have said, hey, wait a second, stop. Let's put a moratorium in place. Let's put the brakes on this and figure out how we can do this in an economically sensitive way. Folks, we're out of time for this segment. When we come back, we're going to keep talking about data centers because this is a big deal. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of Indiana. So, folks, this is from Wall Street Apes. We're talking about data centers, and it says Amazon agrees to pay $20.5 million to settle allegations that its data center in Morrow County, Oregon, contributed to contaminating groundwater with nitrate pollution in the agricultural community. Here's what happens. Amazon uses huge volumes of water to cool its data centers. Because the data centers use water that has nitrates in it from the area, water evaporates during the cooling process. What's left is highly concentrated nitrate water. That highly concentrated nitrate water then goes back out over the farmland, seeping back into the groundwater. Now imagine this nationwide on a massive scale due to thousands of data centers being built. This is from Wall Street Apes.
just shows you. I mean, the environment, it's not just the fact that these things are just an annoyance for communities, it's the environmental impact. Nobody talks about that. And where are all those supposed environmentalists complaining about this? Do you see them anywhere?
You know, according to Polymarket, Maine has approved a bill freezing construction of new data centers until November of 2027. And I like Thomas Massey's intake on this. He talks about the Republican Judiciary Committee will vote on a House resolution to give exemptions for data centers from environmental regulations. Thomas Massey said, "I'll vote no because no industry deserves special treatment under the law. If the regulations are too onerous, repeal them for everyone." And folks, that's where I want to touch base again on property taxes. Here we are giving these massive tax abatements to these billion and trillion dollar corporations. You know, why don't we do the same thing for Hoosier taxpayers and create a level playing field for everyone? If we're going to be giving a massive tax abatement for 50 years to a data center in a community, I think every home in that area should get a 50-year abatement for their property taxes.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
turnabout's fair play. Why can't the rules apply to everyone equally?
Well, when it comes to the establishment politicians, it's always about rules for thee, but not for me.
Well, and Thomas Massey went on and he asked Grok about this, and he says, so the top 5 companies likely to benefit most from H.R. 8037 limiting litigation delays on data center permits are the leading hyperscalers with massive AI-driven expansions facing frequent environmental challenges. Number 1 is Microsoft Azure. Number 2 is Amazon AWS. Number 3 is Alphabet, and that's Google Cloud. Number 4 is Meta, that's Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. And number 5 is Oracle. These operators account for the bulk of new U.S. hyperscale capacity amid surging demand. You know, folks, what I don't like about Meta, and yeah, I have a Facebook account and I post on Facebook a lot, but we all remember back during COVID how you got censored if you dared question the public narrative. You know, why are we giving these tax abatements to these people that so willingly went around censoring Hoosiers, censoring Americans all across the United States? But listen to this. This is from Sam Altman. He says, "We see a future where intelligence is a utility, like electricity or water, and people buy it from us on a meter." Folks, he just said the quiet part out loud. We are being forced to subsidize these data centers so that these tech billionaires and trillionaires can force us down the road to quote unquote rent or buy our own intelligence back from them. That's the nut of all this.
Yeah, well, I'm glad he incriminated himself because now we know what their real goal is.
It's monopolizing everything.
Well, this is from Wide Awake Media. It says, "Will we still need humans in the AI era?" Bill Gates says, quote unquote, "Not for most things. We'll decide." You know, Bill Gates wants to be the arbiter of what humans can or cannot be in the future. It shouldn't be up to the tech billionaires to decide our future. It should be up to Hoosiers, up to taxpayers, up to people just wanting to live their lives.
And this is the same guy who was lecturing us about COVID, and I would say I'm not going to take lectures from Bill Gates, and I especially am not taking lectures from somebody who went to Epstein Island.
That's right.
This is the sad part on all this and what the real reason they're pushing these data centers. There's a new concept out called Rent-A-Human, often referred to as rentahuman.ai. And it says, and here's what happens. A new online marketplace called Rent-A-Human was launched in February of 2026, where over 500,000 humans have registered to offer physical labor to AI agents. How dystopian is that? You know, the platform developed by cryptic engineer Alexander Lightplow and Patricia Tanney acts as a meat space layer for AI agents such as OpenClaw and Claude Bot that can handle digital tasks but lack physical presence. So how a Rent-A-Human works. The concept: AI agents act as managers, posting jobs on the platform to hire humans for real-world tasks they cannot do themselves. So, folks, we're going to be left as basically slaves to these data centers, and we're being forced to subsidize it. That's the problem on all this. The reports indicate over 500,000 users have signed up to be rented by AI agents. And this is from rentahuman.ai. It says they have 646,455 rentable humans. AI needs your body. AI can't touch grass. You can. You get paid when an agent needs someone in the real world. Welcome to the future, folks.
All I'm going to say is no AI is going to be renting me. I can guarantee you that.
Yep. They ain't going to touch us.
And folks, they're being so nefarious on how they implement this. And we talk about Amazon, where they are subjecting their workers, actually, allegedly, having to walk around a dead body in one of their distribution warehouses in Oregon. Listen to this. This is from Tukey from KL on Twitter. Amazon made their 2,847 software engineers spend 8 months documenting every code pattern, every debugging workflow, every optimization trick, then fed it all to AI, and then they fired every one of them. They didn't just replace their workers, they made their workers build their own replacements first and package themselves for deletion. That is what is anti-human about these data centers.
I mean, talk about making a condemned man tie his own noose over here.
And folks, this is from Concerned Hoosier on Twitter. It says, folks, I want to speak plainly about something that is unfolding across Indiana. In the last 5 years, roughly 50 data centers have been built or proposed across nearly 30 communities in our state. Some regions are seeing clusters form along transmission corridors. This isn't a rumor. It's a structural shift on how our land, how our power grid, and how our water are being used. Let's ground this on simple math. 1 megawatt powers about 760 homes. Indianapolis uses around 2,800 megawatts. That supports the life of a city that's neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, water plants, traffic systems, businesses. Now look at the proposed digital load from just a handful of companies. Amazon, 4,550 megawatts. Google, 2,700 megawatts. Meta, 1,147 megawatts. Microsoft, 1,534 megawatts. These are individual sites totaling nearly 10,000 megawatts. That's the equivalent of powering more than 7.5 million homes. Folks, that's the equivalent of powering more than 7.5 million homes. That is way more than the number of Hoosiers that live in our state. That's 3.5 times the electrical demand of Indianapolis. This is not small. This is not abstract. Again, this is from Concerned Hoosier. This is a grid-level transformation, and electricity is only half the story. Every megawatt turns into heat. That heat requires water to remove it. At scale, that can mean millions of gallons per day per facility. And when one site pumps heavily, it creates a cone of depression in the aquifer. When many pump from the same formation, those cones overlap. Water tables shift. Flow directions change. Chemistry can change. Recovery, if something goes wrong, is measured in decades. Aquifers are not factories. They cannot be rebuilt with capital investment. They recharge slowly through soil, through forests, through time. Now layer in tax policy. Again, this is from Concerned Hoosier. Some of these facilities are being lured here with tax abatements that stretch for decades. In some cases, up to 80 years. That means trillion-dollar corporations are operating with sharply reduced property tax on any tax burden exposure. All the while, homeowners continue paying every single year. I will pay property taxes my entire life. Many of you will too. The question is not whether companies should profit. The question is whether the long-term risks to our land, our water, and our grid are being weighed with the same seriousness as the incentives being offered. This is not anti-technology. We all use the digital world. This is about stewardship. It is about asking whether growth is being matched with responsibility. If we're going to add the electrical equivalent of multiple Indianapolises to our landscape, then we deserve a transparent conversation about these policy decisions. Where is the power going to come from? Where is the water going to come from? How much is withdrawn? How is recharge protected? Who pays if something goes wrong? How long do the tax abatements last? This is our state. These are our aquifers. This is our water our children and grandchildren will depend on. Again, this is from Concerned Hoosier. Pay attention, folks. Attend meetings. Ask direct questions. Request data. Demand clarity. Speak respectfully but firmly. Local decisions shape long timelines. The grid runs above us. The aquifer lies beneath us. What we choose now will echo for generations. Let us be citizens who care enough to look beneath the surface. So, folks, we're out of time for this segment. When we come back, we're going to keep talking about data centers and the enormous electrical costs they are imposing, not just on Hoosiers, but Americans nationwide. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on the radio dial. So, folks, in the studio today with me are the Justins and Aiden. I want to give you all a time to promote your social media presence. So we'll start out with Aiden. Go first, please.
Certainly. Justin and I, Justin, George, and myself host the Neurologic podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram.
And the Redneck Republican. Justin, welcome to the studio, Justin.
Always a pleasure to come in. As John said, I'm best known as the Redneck Republican. I'm most active on my X account, at the GOP Redneck. And then I also have a Facebook that I occasionally post on called just the Redneck Republican. Feel free to check me out on my socials.
Well, folks, if you're a regular to this show, you will have heard all these guys a lot in the past. I believe in bringing along the next generation. They are all conservatives who are just getting started out in life, and they are ideological conservatives, which is something I want to make the Republican Party, conservative again. Sadly, today it is not. They all talk conservative, but it's absolutely positively not. The one defining ideal amongst these people in the room that were just introduced to you is they are conservative. They do not believe government is the answer to everything. They know that government is usually the problem. If you try to make every solution from government, you're going to end up with something pretty bad. Ronald Reagan taught us that, to my generation years and years ago. He would always say, if you hear these words, I'm from the government, we're here to help, you'd pretty much slam the door in their face.
Run far away.
And the other thing Ronald Reagan talked about, and I think how it relates to the present GOP establishment, is how he likened Congress back then to spending like drunken sailors. The only difference is, he would always point this out, the drunken sailors were spending their own money. So that's okay. A drunken sailor, more power to them. If they earn that money, they can go out and spend it how they want.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we get people like Jim Banks and Todd Young and Aaron Houchin and Jefferson Shreve who voted for trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt, who vote for Joe Biden levels of government spending, and yet pretend to be conservative when they come back to Indiana to Lincoln Day dinners. I always liken it to a drag show. It's totally fake. It's a bunch of people pretending to be something they're not. Just like a drag queen is not really a woman, a career politician who votes for massive new government debt in no way, shape, or form is a conservative. They're a fake. That's drag to them. You have to step back and say, hey, wait a second. I thought we were supposed to be a red state, a conservative state, an ideologically conservative state, a morally conservative state. But these people like Jim Banks, again, it's like the crime thing, voting for a bill that released criminals from prison early. That's not being conservative. That's being pro-crime. That's
100%.
Jim Banks in a nutshell. It's all fake. You know, how repulsive is it that he thumps his chest on how anti-crime he is, but then he's the one that voted for the bill that releases criminals from prison early. But back on point for this show, folks, we're talking about data centers. And we're talking about data centers all across the state of Indiana. I have billboards up all across the state of Indiana that say no to data centers. And by that I mean no tax abatements to data centers, no subsidies to data centers. We need an equal playing field. If a corporation is coming in and literally taking all of our groundwater and our electricity, they need to be paying out the wazoo for it, to the economic benefit of Hoosiers. Now the taxpayers are having to subsidize them for taking all of our resources. It's the exact opposite of what should be happening.
Exactly. Like you said previously, we are subsidizing our own demise, and that is absolutely pathetic.
Well, I just don't believe in these handouts to the billionaires, who are putting in these data centers. And folks, we get sold this bill of goods that these data centers are going to just offer massive new numbers of jobs. Listen to this. This is from cleveland.com on Twitter. State officials on Monday approved a $4.5 million sales tax exemption to land a $136 million data center in Northwest Ohio, creating 10 full-time jobs. This is from Daniel Horowitz in response to that. What's hilarious is how they openly admit the job creation is 10 out of a $4.5 million tax abatement.
That's so pathetic.
And folks, how many of those jobs will be outsourced to India via H-1B visas?
All of them.
Maybe we'll get the job mowing the grass outside if we're lucky. But probably not. That'll probably be a robot someday. These companies aren't supplementing the grid. They're replacing it for themselves. They're taking it for themselves. Think about what's actually happening here. 7 companies now control more computing power than most governments. And today they're signing paperwork to control their own energy supply too. Computing, data, energy, infrastructure. That's not a tech company anymore, folks. Tech companies are becoming energy companies. Energy companies are becoming AI infrastructure. And the line between big tech and big energy is about to disappear completely. The big question here, when 7 companies control the world's intelligence and the power that runs it, who is actually governing who? Folks, I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. We are being forced to subsidize these tech companies taking over almost all aspects of our life. We're going to be forced to buy power from the data centers someday. This is from Daniel Horowitz. They promised AI data centers would pay their own way. It was a lie. They will have you pay for the updates to the grid. Your energy bills are skyrocketing, and taxpayer money is bailing out the infrastructure needs to run Meta, Microsoft, and these open AI facilities. You are footing the bill for their literal power grab. Well, this is what Zero Hedge had to say about this. Oracle plans thousands of job cuts as data centers costs rise. Oracle said the planned reductions are all across the company. This is Daniel Horowitz's response to this. I thought they were going to create jobs.
Create jobs? Yeah, they were never going to do that, were they?
Exactly. It's more like create a dystopian future.
Yeah.
And we're going to prevent that.
That's right.
I just want to give one shout out to a person, Joe Volk, who, ran a state Senate campaign. It was unfortunately not successful. He has been fighting hard against the data center that they want to put in the old Jefferson Proving Grounds. And I want to say I really appreciate him for doing that, because when he lost his campaign, he could eventually said, "All right, I lost, I'm done, I'm just going to go home." But no,
he's fighting for Hoosiers. He's actually fighting.
Exactly.
Even though he did not win his election, he is still fighting for Hoosiers, and I think that's what Sarah Janice Brown is doing
in the 6th congressional
district, she's not giving up either.
But that was a close race between her and the current congressman. That was really close. I don't think anybody expected that, but she pulled off something nobody thought was possible, and she's still fighting even now.
Yes, and thank you, Sarah, for fighting the good fight and keeping up, and for everything that you do to stand strong for our values and just continue strong as always. We appreciate it.
So, folks, we're running out of time, but I want to close with a parting thought from Thomas Jefferson. When the people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. Amen. Folks, I'm going to close this program with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Folks, I will see you all again next week on the radio. You all take care.